payoff is not just in your financial growth opportunities, but it's also in having the clarity and confidence to talk to other people. It makes it easier to talk about yourself when you know who you are and what you have to offer, and you've worked through that at the deepest layers. It's easier to shift your narrative when you already have a strong foundation of knowing what your brand is all about and what you have to offer. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo, and I am thrilled that you're here. This is the first of 3-part series I'm doing on managing your personal brand. And I am so excited that you are here because I think that this content is really going to support you in having the career and the trajectory that you want for yourself. If you're new to the podcast, let me take a pause and introduce myself. Again, I'm Tosca DiMatteo, and I'm the founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting. I do the work to help people transform what's possible in their careers, and I do this through one-on-one coaching, keynote speaking, and conversation facilitation, talking about transformation at the deepest layers. So whether that's talking about our inner critics, the boundaries we need to hold, or how we manage our personal brands, I do that work. So if you want to learn more, please visit coachtosca.com. All right, so here's the thing. One of the key topics that I talk about in conferences and private, engagements is personal branding. And it's really part and parcel to what I talk about in terms of the inner critic work that I do. Because when we understand what we're saying to ourselves about our personal brand and our careers and all that good stuff, we can start to then shift how we're talking about ourselves and our journey in a way that actually serves us. This paves the way to stand in our full power and own the beauty of what we have to offer to the world in terms of our personal branding. So I often do this 1-2 punch of like inner critics. Let's get out of our own way. Let's say goodbye. Let's step into our confidence. And then I follow that up with a conversation around personal branding. And I'm excited to share with you some of these main points that I talk about over the course of this 3-part series, because what I see time and time again is that folks are so focused on like the here and now and like what do they need to do in their immediate job or immediate situation that they're not taking the time to actually manage their personal brand. And the world has changed dramatically. And unlike, me, when I was like coming up in my career, it was pretty simple. You started looking for a new job when you were kind of done with your old one. You updated your resume and then you sent out a bunch of applications. The way the world works now is you need to actually manage your brand actively, not just for those external opportunities, but also for the internal ones. And I talk about this from a place of, I get it, because I've lived within organizations for 25 years and I had to manage my personal brand. And I had to be very active and proactive in advancing in my career. I learned a lot about doing that and how important it is because I didn't have this experience when I was in corporate of just getting tapped on the shoulder. And I think there's a lot of folks out there that do have that experience where they kind of never really have to manage their career. They're just kind of like put into situations. But the other piece about that is even if that has been your experience, then that means you're not necessarily in the driver's seat of your career. And what I want to talk to you about today is how you really get in the driver's seat of your career so that the opportunities that you land are the ones that you actually want, are the ones that say yes to, are the ones that really align with your brand and where you want to take your brand and what you want to expand to over the life of your career and not just for today or tomorrow. Because the other thing about personal branding is it's really about taking the longer view. It's really about saying, look, I'm going to have a really long career. Look, we're living longer than ever. Our careers are going to be multiple careers within one lifetime. And that wasn't always the case. It wasn't that long ago where the norm was to be in one company for 10, 20, or 30 years. We're not in that age anymore. We're not in that playing field. The reason why I'm starting this series with this idea of making the case for why you have to manage your personal brand is because I know that so many people aren't doing it. Especially for women, what happens is when we're not doing that, then we're missing out on value within our careers, with the prosperity of what we can make. But by taking a proactive role in our career management journey, we have the potential to make more money. That's the bottom line. Let me just start with the bottom line, let alone being more fulfilled in your career and feeling less overwhelmed and feeling less intimidated about talking about yourself and putting yourself out there. I'm sorry. I just feel like I just got all hot and heated because I feel so strongly that we can do this manageably. You know what I mean? Like the first thing that I want to talk to you about is really around this idea of why there's so much resistance to managing our personal brand. And I feel like I have to talk about this because if I don't convince you that it's worth it, then you're going to walk away from this conversation not doing a damn thing differently. And I really want you to start to put time on your calendar and in your life to say, okay, I'm going to do some work around my personal brand. But let me talk to you about why I think we resist this. And like, I'm included in this. Like, I clearly as an entrepreneur, like I have to be really managing my brand, right? Like, and there's a difference between selling and managing a brand. But suffice it to say that I think a big reason why folks don't want to actively talk about themselves, actively manage the perception of their brand is because we have a lot of past conditioning from society and from those in our lives that lead us to want to actually stay quiet. And this includes things like messages we've heard around being seen and not heard, messages around that we have to be liked, especially as women, we have to be liked, and that's priority. And to be liked means that we don't want to say anything that somebody might disagree with or not like. And the whole look, the concept of marketing is to be polarizing. The concept is to say, I'm for these people and I'm not for these people, and making it very clear what that is. And that means there might be people that don't like you, but we have to be willing to put ourselves out there, not with the intention of being liked, but with the intention of being courageous and honoring who we are and honoring that we will attract the opportunities that are meant for us because we are willing to be truthful and authentic in the brand that we put out there. The other piece around conditioning that presents so much resistance is that there's this myth of meritocracy out there, right? Like if you just keep your head down, right, and do the work and just be productive, then you don't need to worry about managing your brand because you're going to get tapped on the shoulder. Now, y'all know that ain't the truth. It's the furthest from the truth. We do not live in a world of meritocracy. We have to manage the narrative and our brand. But I digress. And the other piece, I think a big piece under conditioning is that we've been conditioned to focus solely and only on productivity. That the only thing that matters is the output that we produce and the results that we get. And because of this, it means that we are not taking the time to manage our careers and manage our brand. And that is hurting us in all the ways. The other piece of resistance comes from, I think, existing paradigms that are out there that we basically are like, oh my God, this is gross. I don't ever want to come off this way. And so I think what a lot of people do is say, I don't want to be perceived that way. So I'm just not going to say anything at all. So for example, the folks that are out there putting themselves out there in a very transactional versus relational way, I think that turns a lot of folks off, especially women, where, the paradigm is around like this hard sell, old school paradigm, like, like, hey, are you having trouble with your finances? I can help, or like the idea of like, but wait, there's more. And so I think we get confused around like selling tactics and actually managing your brand. But because we see things that are gross out there around talking about brands, we just want to stay away from it. So that looks like inauthenticity. It looks like the masks that people wear. It looks like inflated promises, inflated stories and information. And, we see a lot of self importance, egos, and arrogance out there. And I think this is a major turnoff from even wanting to manage our brand. And I am bringing up these resistances because if you're nodding your head, yeah, exactly, I don't want to do that. Okay, great. Now we're starting to see how we're getting in our own way because all of these factors for resistance of managing our personal brand is getting in the way of us making the money that we deserve, getting the opportunities we want, and attracting the clients that we want. And the last piece I'll say around resistance is I think that what plays a big role is our own criticism of ourselves, our own voices in our head that are telling us, don't speak up, don't share your story. Nobody wants to hear it. Or maybe that voice is telling us to be afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing, alienate some people, shoot ourselves in the foot. So, like, just don't say anything and just, you know, hope that the opportunities come to you. And especially when it comes to, I think, entrepreneurs and folks who are really in the world of selling, I think that what holds us back is that we feel we're not differentiated. And you know what? Scratch that. I think that happens for folks working inside companies too. Like, what's the difference between me and this other person that does accounting? Or what's the difference between what I have to offer this other person who has a similar career path? And that stuff just isn't true. And when we listen to those self critical voices and when we take action or inaction on them, then we're holding ourselves back from shining our light, from sharing who we are, from letting people know, hey, this is the value that I bring and keep me in mind for when you're ready for this. I experience with my clients a lot of resistance to putting themselves out there. And I mean, this runs from former CEOs who experience self doubt and inner critic voices and struggle with putting themselves out there to folks who are early in their career and don't know how to see the value that they bring because they're still building their experience set. It runs the gamut. I think it's very normal to have this perspective that like I don't want to manage my brand. It's too much work and it can feel overwhelming. I think a lot of people feel like they don't have time for it. And part of what I want you to get out of this part 1 is that you absolutely have to make time to manage your brand. And I just want to make it real easy for you to understand what I mean by personal brand. So let me just talk about what that is at a very quick high level. A personal brand basically helps other folks to make easier and quicker decisions about whether you can help them with their problems or their pain points or their needs. So, at the most basic level, personal branding includes 2 components. And the first component is who are you being? How are you showing up, in other words? And the other component is what can you help with? What are the problems that you solve? These are the 2 components of personal branding. And brands obviously they operate in a context, right? So it's not something that we can do the work on in a bubble either. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because in the second part, I'm going to go deeper into the components of what a personal brand is. But the point of today's conversation is to help you understand why you really have to start managing it. And so let me talk briefly about that. And I've mentioned some of these things, but let me revisit. So the reasons why you need to manage your brand, I can like separate into 2 factors. The first is internal factors and the second is external factors. And there's definitely a golden thread between them. First of all, if you work for another organization or if you work for a brand, we have to realize that we are not our employer's brands. Yes, our employer does contribute to our brand, but we have our own brand and that does add value to whatever organization that we're in. We are not our employer's brand. I just want to say that again, which means we have to develop our own brand. And yes, part of that will incorporate the brands that we are associated with. But when we're working with folks internally, we have to communicate with other people who we are and what they can expect. Again, that helps them to make decisions around who do they want to work with, who do they want to partner with, and how do they want to operate with you. Another internal factor that goes without saying, right, is that the players are constantly changing. And to survive and thrive in organizations, especially large organizations, we have to constantly be letting people know who we are and what we're all about and be willing to do that over and over again as players change. I mean, look, I grew up in a career where literally I had a new boss every year at least. And then their bosses were constantly changing. And so we just have to constantly be building brand awareness. I mean, look, McDonald's has been out there for how many years? And we're still seeing ads about McDonald's. Why? Well, obviously, more and more people are being born, but right, we have to constantly share ourselves with the world and let people know. And that is definitely the case in a world in which, right, we work with a lot of people. There's a lot of players and there's a lot of messages. And so we have to make sure that we're a part of those conversations. Internally as well, I might be stating the obvious, but having visibility and established trust is what enables opportunity. Being proactive in managing our brand and getting our nose out of the work and lifting our heads up and saying, hey, like this is who I am and this is what I do. You may not even see what I do behind the scenes because I'm just doing a fabulous job, but let me tell you about what I'm doing. We have to build that visibility so that we are top of mind when opportunities come up. And a big part also from an internal perspective is we cannot wait until year end or mid year to manage our brand during review time. We have to constantly be letting folks know what we're doing, how we're doing it, the results that we're getting, because the idea about review time is it shouldn't come with any surprises. It should be really a check the box situation because you've already done so much of your messaging and communicating before that. So those are some of the internal factors for why we have to manage our brand proactively, consistently, and persistently. The second component is the external factor, right? Which I think what happens is people get so focused on surviving and thriving in the current job that they're in that they forget that there is an outside world out there and that it will serve you the best to not operate in a vacuum and remember that you have a long career to manage. From an external perspective, we have to remember that there's disruption and fragmentation in the process of recruitment and hiring, and also in the purchase process if you're an entrepreneur and you're offering services, right? And technology is a big reason for that. And I won't go into the details of it, but right, suffice it to say that we don't live in a world in which it's like you get a job through posting on a company board or you talk to somebody that works there and you found a way in. Those are two methods out of dozens that are out there now, right? Dozens, meaning different job sites and the social media sites and the LinkedIn's of the world and all that stuff. Like there's so many different ways where opportunities are communicated and found that we have to be, kind of aware of these things, not just when we're ready to find the next thing. We have to be aware of how this fragmentation is working so that we can navigate it and be out there building relationships in advance of needing to get our foot in the door somewhere. Careers are getting longer as well. So when we have to kind of, like I say, get out of this insulated view of like all that matters is I'm winning in this job right here, right now. And we have to look at more expansive view of managing our whole career. And remember that it's the connections and the relationships that we build that build the equity and our value. And that's not just internally, it's externally as well. I can't tell you how many times like I was building relationships outside of my employer and I would end up using some of these connections to support me in my job or perhaps bringing other folks on board or whatever. And then that adds value to my brand and my value to the organization. It's a small world, folks. So keeping an eye on the external is definitely going to support you in the long run. Being aware of the external and being connected outside of your organization helps you to build a pipeline to mitigate risk and the uncontrollables of life. So, a pipeline meaning the pipeline of opportunities, of connections, of outreach. of potential clients, like all the things, because we don't know. Tomorrow we could get laid off. Tomorrow our clients could leave us. And so by staying connected to the external world, it will help you so that when the uncontrollable things happen in your life and in the world, you are not, holding an empty bag. You've still got a bag with some goodies in it that you can explore. And I think this often happens too when people are doing well, when they're satisfied, when they're fulfilled. Let's just say they have a full client roster or you're really happy in your job. That's when it's easy to not worry about your branding, but that's actually the most beautiful time to think about it because you're not in a state of scarcity or depression. You're not in a state of being upset or miserable, desperation. You're in a state of, you know what, things are well. I wonder how much better they could be. Let me just put myself out there, and have some connections. So it's just a different way of looking at it, but I think it can be extremely valuable. And the thread between all of this is that we have to play the long game of our careers. We have to play the long game. And we are so conditioned to think short term. We are conditioned to think quarter to quarter as opposed to looking out. And I'm not saying predict the future. I'm just saying know that where you are right now is likely not the same place you're going to be in 5 years, maybe not even in 2 years. And so we have to get ourselves out of the weeds of our day to day and look at the forest through the trees. And that's what managing your personal brand is all about. And that is what I want to convince you of today to really start to make the time for. Because the payoff, as I started this conversation, is not just in your financial growth opportunities, but it's also in having the clarity and confidence to talk to other people. It makes it easier to talk about yourself when you know who you are and what you have to offer. And you've worked through that at the deepest layers. It's easier to shift your narrative when you already have a strong foundation of knowing what your brand is all about and what you have to offer. Think about some of those businesses or even individuals during the pandemic that were totally thrown for a loop. And I think that the ones that were really, really thrown for a loop are the ones that weren't doing that grounding work, that fundamental work of understanding the truth of your brand, the authenticity of your brand, and standing firm in that. I mean, hence the pivot became such a popular word, right? But I think when you have a really strong foundation, you're not doing these massive pivots because you're just now shifting your narrative in context of the world that has changed. But I digress. Let me get off of that soapbox. Look, I think I talked about it before, but I'll say it again. In terms of the payoff of managing your brand is you remain top of mind with folks, with your network. And so when opportunities come up, you'll find that you have advocates out there that are saying your name in rooms that you're not in, and they feel comfortable saying your name in rooms you're not in because they are clear about what your brand is and what you have to offer because you've been talking about it and you've been communicating it. You picking up what I'm putting down, people? That managing your personal brand has extreme benefits, and it's more necessary now than it's ever been to be proactive in understanding yourself, your offerings as a service, right? Because a personal brand is at the end of the day, you offering a service. You are your product. And because skill sets are changing, innovation is happening at unprecedented rates, we have to be really clear about what our superpowers are so that we can be more flexible and adaptable in today's world. And obviously, in broken systems, which is what we kind of have, especially in the world of corporate, we have to take the bull by the horns. We've got to get in the driver's seat. How many more metaphors do you want from me today? But we have to be proactive because the other benefit of being proactive is you get to direct where your career is going so that you can feel good about it, so that you can take ownership of it. And so that in 20 years, you're not looking back and going, man, I just said yes to what dropped in my lap because I wasn't actually driving the bus. And now maybe you find yourself in a spot that you don't want to be. And you know what? If that's where you are right now and you feel like, how did I even get here? Then you came to the right place, and know that you're exactly where you're meant to be, and continue listening to this series because you're going to get some tips on how to drive the bus in the direction that you want, that feels good, and that honors who you are and the career and life that you want to have. I'm so glad you're here. And wherever you are, remember that you're exactly where you're meant to be. There are no mistakes. Nothing is wasted. If you haven't done a darn thing around managing your personal brand, don't worry. I'm here to support you. It is never too late. It is never too late. So if you actually want to explore working together one-on-one, or if you want me to bring some of these topics to your organization, don't be afraid to visit coachtosca.com. And there's all the information that you need to figure out how we can do some deeper work together. And if not, then I hope to see you here, feel your energy here in the Unlock Lab next week when I talk about what is personal branding. And I go deeper into that to give you a stronger sense and hopefully demystify and make it feel a whole heck of a lot easier. Because I don't think it needs to be overwhelming. I think that the reason why I want to talk to you about this is to actually make it feel completely doable. So over the course of these 3 sections, I hope you feel that way. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. And I hope that at the end of the day, at the end of this conversation, you feel like you've been convinced that it's time to more proactively manage your personal brand. If that's a yes, then this was a win, and I'm so glad you're here. All right. Thank you so much once again, and ciao for now.